All right, everyone. So in the last video, we kind of went over the user interface and how to set up a Unity file. I'm working from these are Joule files. So by the way, you don't have to turn these in. These are just purely for practice purposes only. I am inside of exercise one, navigation. If you want to, everything I'm saying, you can either view it in my video. I also have a instructions here. Okay, whoops, which I should put in assets. There we go. All right. And the instructions will kind of also go over everything I talked about here. So either way, whether you're a written person or a, um, a video type person. All right. So exercise one, I want to talk about navigating through Unity. Okay. So this is exercise one. And just to kind of show you, this is the scene. This is kind of all one model. And then there's actually this red spaceship here. So I want to talk about navigating. The first thing is to do what's called orbiting. You might remember in Blender, orbiting was when you would sort of orbit around the model. The way I kind of explain it is, let's just say that this, remote was my object and this is a camera. It orbits around the model, kind of like the way that the Earth orbits around the Earth. Sorry, the moon orbits around the Earth, or the Earth orbits around the sun. Okay. The way I'm doing that here is I have a 2-button or 3-button mouse, right, left button, right button, and middle button here. And what I'm going to do is simply hold down on the left mouse button and holding down the Option key. You can see I'm getting this eye icon. And when I do that, I orbit around my framed object, which in this case is this entire thing. Okay. Another way to do it is just using the right mouse button. You can see I'm orbiting as well. Okay. If I hold down the Option, you will notice that this turns into the eye icon. So if you're holding down that modifier, that I'm having access to it. We can also zoom in and out of the model. Ways we can do that, I'm going to use the middle mouse button on my mouse. If I scroll up, I'm zooming away. And if I scroll down, I'm zooming towards. Another way to do this is holding down the Option in the right mouse button. When I do that, you can see that my icon turns actually from the hand icon into the magnifying glass, which is to zoom in and out. Finally, we may want to pan around our scene. The way that we can do that is you can actually hold down the hand tool, which is in your toolbox here, and I can move this around. So I'm panning. Another way to do this, if I wasn't using that tool, is I can hold down the middle mouse button and the shift button at the same time, and that allows me to pan around my scene as such. Okay. So that's just how we can move, orbit, zoom, and pan around our scene. Now, when I orbit and I zoom, I'm actually orbiting around this entire model. This is actually one model. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I wanted to change my focus from this to this model here. What I'm going to do is using the move tool, which we'll talk about in a second, I'm just going to highlight it. Okay, this is called the spaceship. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F, okay, which is frame selected in window under cursor. And what it's actually going to do is it seems like what it did is it zoomed in on it, which it did do. But the other thing that's kind of worth noting is now if I orbit, you'll notice that I'm orbiting around that model and not this whole scene. I'm going to add another model real quick. Don't worry about how I'm doing this. just for the sake of argument, I'm going to place it over here. And I'm just going to, don't worry about once again what I'm doing. We'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so right now I'm orbiting around this. I'm going to highlight this green sphere that I created. And let's do that again. Edit, frame selected and seen. And I zoom in on that. And now once again, when I orbit around that. And when I zoom in and out on that item. Okay, so, you know, we can orbit, but we can also change which object we're orbiting around. Okay, I'm just going to save what I'm doing. And let's go to exercise 2. And let's talk about adding models into our scene. So this is my scene. It's pretty bare bones. It's got really nothing in it except for some lights and cameras, which I'm not going to talk about at the moment. What I'm going to do is add a model to my scene. Okay, so I'm going to go to models. And these are existing models in my project. I can always add to this. You saw me in my last video add a model from Blender. And what I'm going to do is take this model and I'm going to drag it in. Okay. Now I added it to my scene here. Okay. Now, if you remember, let's go back to Blender real quick. You might remember that when we were in Blender, if I highlight a model, I had these properties if I go under object. So for instance, this is like the location of the model in 3D space. So it's at its origin. So there's like the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. So, you know, since the z is the vertical, if I did this or this would go up and down. If I did this and this, it's going left and right technically because I'm along the y-axis, so on and so on. And that's pretty much the same thing we have here in Unity. If I highlight this model, which is this checkerboard here, I have checkerboard here in my inspector. That's the object I currently have highlighted. At the very top, if you don't have it open, just undo this. This is transform. This is exactly where my object is placed in space. Okay, so just like in Blender, we have X, Y, or sorry, I take that back. This is X, Z, and then actually Y goes up and down. Okay, that's where it's a little different than Blender. In Blender, Z was the sort of the vertical axis. Here it's the y-axis. That can sometimes lead to your models turning because, you know, like you might wonder, why is this kind of on its side? Because when I built it in Blender, you know, if I were to build something in Blender, this is the z-axis, but now the z-axis is actually like on the side. So it actually has to kind of rotate at 90 degrees. But anyway, let's say I wanted to place this in the center. I'm going to set this to 0, 0, 0. Another way to do this is, you know, I could right click, or I could choose this option here and choose reset. That's another way to do that. Oops. Although I'm not going to do that because that's going to do some weird stuff with this scaling I have on the z-axis here, but I'll set that to 0, 0, 0. Now, if I, you know, I could either use the move tool here to move this, so I can move along the x-axis. So that's positive comes towards the camera in this case, negative goes away. I could use the blue or the z-axis to go right or left. And the y-axis in this case goes up and down. So the green axis, so if I pull it up, you can see the y value changes. And if I pull it down, the y value gets to a negative number. Okay. I'm just going to leave it at 0, 0, 0. We could also rotate this. Actually, let's skip for that for now. Let's do the scale. So you guys probably remember in Blender, we could scale things. So I could scale things either along a particular axis point or scale the whole thing, meaning I keep all of the X, Y, and Z axes in ratio to each other. We can kind of do the same thing here. So I could, with the, this is the scale tool, it's even pretty much the same icon as it was in Blender. You can see that when I do this, I'm changing the Y value. This is the Z value, or sorry, the X value. And this is the, sorry, this is the Z. The Z is kind of hard for this particular model because What it's really doing is scaling the height, but the height was so thin, because it's basically a thin plane. Now, if you wanted to do all three, what you could do is just use this, the center gray box. And that's what I'm going to do. Another way I could do this is typing this out. So if I did 5 by 5 by 5, actually, let's keep it at, I don't know, 0.25. There you go. What I've done here is these numbers are sort of like multipliers. Like think of the default size of your model as 1, 1, 1 in the X, Y, and Z. If I made it 2, 2, 2, what I'm saying is 2 times the normal X axis, 2 times the normal Y axis, 2 times the normal Z axis, so on and so on. So what I'm saying here is I'm taking the X and the Y axis, which is this, and I'm timesing it by 5 to make it a little bit wider. I'm going to drag another item here. I'm going to take this monkey and just kind of drag it in. This is a good time maybe to use the scale too. Let's scale this down. I don't know. I don't know if this is just let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to scale this up a little bit. I thought it was a little, maybe I need this to be a little bigger. That's probably better. Okay. So I got this monkey here, and I'm going to use the last one, which is the rotate. Just like in Blender, where we had rotation and we could rotate along the 3 axis points. So, I could rotate along the X, the Z, or as I call this, carousel mode, and then towards or away from the camera. We could do the same thing in Unity. So I'm going to orbit, and if I did the X here, I could tilt it towards or away from us. In this case, the Y is the sort of things kind of move like this. Like I said, I call it the carousel method, which is like, the way a carousel kind of rotates like this. If you've ever been on like a carousel at the amusement park or something like that. And then we have the Z axis, which would rotate it, left and right. And once again, you can kind of, move things in 90-degree angles. So if I did 90 degrees, I'm turning it clockwise, 180, 270, so on and so on. All right. And that's kind of it. So, what I can do is take these items, place them into my scene, and I don't want them, I want there to be a little, I can see just by looking at it, it's not quite hitting the base here. So I'm going to move them down a little bit as such. I don't want them to be exactly the same size. So why don't we scale them a little bit? And I'm going to rotate this one just a little bit. And maybe I'm going to grab this diamond and I want it to be a little bigger. I'll do this by using the transforms. Let's do 2 by 2 by 2, making it 200% of its normal size. Okay. So why it's good to orbit, just make sure everything's touching properly. Like this monkey's a little bit above. Might want to rotate him just a smidge. All right. Take this. This looks a little too small compared to everything, so I'm just gonna move it and rotate it. All right. So that's working with models. Like I said, you can make your own, you can find models and drag and drop them into your asset folder to have access to them. If I were to come, I could save this model. I could save it as a Blender file and save it into my asset folder and it would appear. I actually recommend for the process of saving on file size a little bit, you can use an FBX. So you take your model and you can export it by going to export FBX. I'm now going to go find that folder, which should be on my desktop here. And just make sure you're in the right folder, assets. I'm going to put them in Unity. I'm going to call this cube. That's a good name. FBX is just the form or the extension, and hit export. And if I go back, there's my model, and I can click and drag it. And it's a little small, so why don't we scale that? Maybe I'll rotate it and move it a little bit. Look at that. Okay. Now, these are models that, you can build yourself in Blender, or in this class, I'm not requiring that unless it states in the instructions that you build your own models. This isn't a modeling class, so I don't really want you to spend a lot of time modeling. That's not really the point of this class. So if you want to find models and put them in your project, that's usually fine with me. If you think there's an issue, just chat with me and we can figure it out. We can also, there are actually models built into Unity that we can take advantage of too. So for instance, if you go under game object, under 3D, there's things like cubes. So I can build a cube. That's a default cube, very small. So I might scale that. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. There it is. Okay. We also have things like a sphere, which is, you guessed it, a sphere or a ball, whatever you want to think of it as. We also have a capsule. Oops, I'm in another sphere. There's a capsule, which is essentially kind of rounded. It's basically a rounded rectangle that's been rotated 360 degrees. Think of it as like a rectangle with rounded outsides. Okay, there's my capsule. And finally, cylinder. And finally, plane. Planes are great for making kind of just playing fields. It's a flat two-dimensional object that I can move in 3D space. All right. That is adding, moving around models in Unity. Last thing I'll teach you in this particular video, let's just talk about organizing things. Okay. So in Blender, you might remember we had something called the outliner. That's what this is. And this is where we can control seeing how many objects were in our scene, in our Blender file. It also lets you do things like organize using what called collections and things like that. And we can do the same thing in Unity. So in this particular scene, I've already added a bunch of stuff. Okay. So you can see, and actually I'm going to move this guy down a little bit. You can see I have some items here, and this actually shows me over here in my left, right there. It shows me all the items that are in my scene. Okay. So it shows me I have a camera, which we'll talk about later, a light. This is the ground plane. These are the diamonds, so on and so on. So if you actually highlight one of these, it actually would point you, it would select that object. So if I click this, that's that particular teddy bear, and I could then use the move tool or whatever, rotate or scale to move or rotate that. You can see that it's highlighted here. Another way is if I were to select something using the move tool, you can see it also selects it in the hierarchy. The hierarchy is nice because not only does it show you every object in your scene, it also lets you temporarily turn them off or not make them editable. So for instance, to the left of, or let's grab the monkey and add him here. Okay, now you can see that when I do that, it adds to my hierarchy. If I turn off and on the visibility toggle, which is the little eye icon, you can see it turns off that item. It doesn't delete it from my scene, it just turns it off temporarily. Another thing you can do is if an item is highlighted, there's this thing that kind of looks like a little, hand glove, as I like to call it. If I turn that off, it has a little icon there. What that means is this object is no longer selectable, which means you can't like move it or accidentally rotate it or something. So you'll notice I can't select, you're noticing I'm actually selecting the ground. But see how I can't select that spaceship anymore? Okay. Now, you can turn this back on. If I go back and do that, now this is now selectable, and I would be able to, move it around. The last thing we can kind of do with the hierarchy is organize. Okay. So in other programs like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator, you might remember the ability to make like layers or groups or something as a way to sort of organize things together. We can do that also in Unity. It's called an empty. Okay, so if I go here and I go create empty, I'm actually going to try to organize all of the palm trees together. So you can see it creates this thing called a game object. And a game object by default in Unity is kind of this empty thing. It doesn't have anything in it. And so you can actually call it whatever you want. I'm just going to click on this, and you can either double click or, right click and choose rename. And I'm going to call this palm tree group. Okay. And then, so by default, this is kind of empty. It doesn't have anything in it. Kind of, you can see that by the fact that these are all blue and this doesn't really have anything in it. What I'm going to do is take this palm tree and drag it to it. Okay. Oops, almost. Third time's the charm. There you go. See how that's indented a little bit? So we have palm tree 1 and then palm tree group. What this means is this is now a subset of palm tree group. So we would say that the palm tree group is the parent, and then the palm tree is a child of the palm tree group. Okay. Now what I'm actually going to do is select all of these palm trees, and I'm going to add all of them together. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, now that they're all inside of this group, I can actually select the group and I can do things that would affect them as a group. So for instance, now if I select the group and I use the move tool, you can see I can move all of them. I could rotate all of them. I could scale all of them. Okay, so, it's just a way to make it easier to sort of affect multiple objects at once. You can also see I could turn them off or turn off their ability to be selected all as a group. Okay, so I'm going to do this 2 more times. It makes sense to use empties when you have many related objects. So for instance, you might notice I have 5 diamonds. I'm going to go hit the little plus sign, create empty. I'm going to call this diamonds. And once again, I'm just going to sort of drag them here. So these are now a subset. And let's do the same for teddy bears. Let's click plus, create empty. I'm going to call this teddy bear group. Maybe I'll call it diamond group, just so I know that there's multiple. And I can do that, and you can see they're all together. By the way, another way of renaming something is if you want, you can name it over here actually in the inspector. You can see how this is called teddy bear -2. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I want to call this teddy bear A, teddy bear B, teddy bear C. I can click on this one and I can actually change it from here, teddy bear A, teddy bear B, and then if I click up here, teddy bear C. This is also a nice way to sort of duplicate things. So with any model highlighted in my hierarchy, if I go to edit, duplicate, it would duplicate whatever is currently selected, which in this case is this red teddy bear. And you can see that now that I've done that, it's made another one. Another way you could do this, I'm going to undo this, is if I right click, there's another way to duplicate. So there's usually multiple ways of doing the same thing as it is in many programs. Okay. All right, so I know I threw a lot at you, but hopefully that's enough to kind of get you started on this. So I want you to try that out. Try navigating, try adding models, maybe even make your own model in Blender super quickly, save it to your asset folder, see how to practice with that, practice with the hierarchy. Okay, in the next video, we're going to talk about creating materials. Okay, we'll also talk about lighting, and we'll talk about cameras.